Welcome, welcome, folks. It is Wednesday, September the 24th. This is Hurricane Hub Live. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandages, and we have got a slam-packed show for you tonight on HHL. We've got a brand new named storm out in the Atlantic Basin, Humberto. It joins Gabrielle. First time this season we've got two storms at the same time. And in the short term, we could have three as we look for the development of Imelda. Let's get right to it tonight. Odds have increased for 94L to become Imelda. We'll share with you the latest tropical weather outlook put out just minutes ago at the top of the hour. Humberto, as I mentioned, has developed a 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. It is also forecast to become the third hurricane of the Atlantic season. And Gabrielle itself still out there, and this thing is cruising towards Europe, and that's a little bit unusual. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And, of course, in the Eastern Pacific, Narda is a hurricane, but that's the only thing going on in the Eastern Pacific. It's starting to quiet down a little bit, which is why the Atlantic is starting, well, a reason why the Atlantic is starting to get a little more active. All right, here's a look at the basin so far this year, the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. We got Barry here over in the Gulf that developed. So we're up to 8 named storms, with the latest addition being Humberto out in the south and southwestern portion of the Atlantic basin there. We'll start quickly with Gabrielle, okay? It's still a Cat 2 hurricane, down from its peak at a Category 4 at 140 mile per hour winds. Just look at how fast this thing is cruising due east. At 29 miles per hour, upper level winds are screaming here out of the west. And this is taking it pretty much straight towards the Azores. And at that point in time that it moves over the northern islands of the Azores, it'll likely be a hurricane, which is unusual. And then post-tropical storm, maybe an extratropical cyclone as it makes it towards Portugal itself. Now, the Azores are a part of Portugal. And the last time that we saw a hurricane actually hit the Azores was a long time ago, 13 years, Gordon, back in 2012. Now, the last time the mainland of Portugal was hit by a tropical system in general, you have to go back to 2020, subtropical storm Alpha. You remember 2020 was the first of our Greek alphabet names. They're the last instance that we used the Greek alphabet. So a little bit unusual, some Portugal hurricane history for you. Now down in the southern portion of the Atlantic, where we've got our new addition, Humberto, tropical storm barely. 39 mile per hour winds or greater as a tropical storm. We're at 40. But National Hurricane Center says, based on satellite data, that it has a closed center of circulation. It is being impacted by some pretty strong southwesterly shear. So as I change this up and show you the visible satellite imagery, it's a little more evident here. We can see some semblance of the low-level circulation kind of being exposed here with these stronger southwest winds. You can see some of the convection out here. And even if you look on here, some of the outflow boundaries that are shooting on out, you see those there and on top, that's an indication of a little bit more of a stable environmental condition. So over the next 24 to 36 hours, it's going to be battling it out with that wind shear and a relatively stable environment surrounding it. But once it gets out of that, it moves into a window of time that it's going to be moving into very favorable conditions for this to develop, and maybe even rapidly. I mean, we saw it happen with Aaron. We saw it happen with Gabrielle. This is also forecast to become a hurricane, a Category 2 at its peak as we get a little bit into later into the forecast period. Likely this weekend it gets that hurricane status. So in regard to climatology here, we're at the 8th named storm. That did occur today, September the 24th, same date that it occurred last year. The average date, when you look back to the last 30 hurricane seasons, is September the 9th. So we're a little bit behind schedule, but we were also behind schedule in 2024. And then we really recouped that time, and we ended up being an above normal season last year. And that's what the call was for this year. So we've got a long ways to go if we are going to hit that outlook that was pretty much forecast by every major institution. We'll see if we do get there. But with Imelda possibly forming here in the next couple of days, that would probably put it close to last year. I mean, last year we September the 25th. Notice how last year we just stacked them 3 in a row within a week's worth of time. 24th, 25th, and 27th, we saw the named storms. Climatology for the 9th, the I named storm is right around September the 16th. So here's a look at, well, this is actually Humberto, so it's got the wrong banner up there. But this is Humberto's forecast track here, going to the north and west. Category 2 hurricane at its peak by Monday afternoon, okay? Disregard up here. This is Humberto, Category 2 hurricane, 110-mile-per-hour winds. Now, as it moves off to the north and west here, modeling on here is pretty much right in line with what the forecast cone is showing right now. Most of these are falling in on that. We're not seeing many outliers, farther to the north and east or farther to the south and west. Most are kind of lining up pretty good. We don't have a ton of divergence here. And they do indicate a northward turn and then a northeast recurvature out to sea, which would spare the eastern seaboard of this. Now, why this is going to get so complicated over the next 7 days is because the upper level steering is going to be impacted by not just the upper level steering winds, but the influence of a separate tropical storm likely, which would be Imelda, likely somewhere in this area. So when you have two storms in close proximity to one another, it does influence their trajectory. It's called the Fujiwara effect. We're going to get into that a little bit more in just a little while, but that may be something here that throws this track off. So keep that in mind. Here's a look at Humberto, 40-mile-per-hour winds. When you look at the ensembles, we do have a little bit more of a spread, especially in the longer term. We've got a few more that dip a little farther to the west here, closer to the eastern seaboard. But again, those are outliers. We also have a few outliers that are farther to the east, most of them falling in line with that forecast cone there. All right, we do have Invest 94L. Remember, investigative area, 90 to 99 is just a category number, or just a catalog number, really. And the L means it's in the Atlantic Basin. Odds have ticked up slightly in the short term, and so in 48 hours is now up to a 40% chance. We'll likely see this developing slowly. So more likely that it develops after 2 days, between 2 and 7 days from now, into the named storm Imelda. So it's got an 80% chance of that happening. It is already causing impacts, okay? Tropical squalls, gusty winds, lots of rain in places like the British U.S. Virgin Islands, North and Leeward Islands, getting over to Puerto Rico. In fact, it's located almost right over Puerto Rico, and then drifting over the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Eventually, it does build northwest and finds itself over the Bahamas. Turks and Caicos, heading off to the northwest, closer to the southeast coast of the U.S. At that point in time, the development odds will be much higher, and the environmental conditions will be a lot more favorable. Spaghetti plots on this do show it, slowly drifting out. So this goes out 7 days. It doesn't move very far. It doesn't cover a large distance in that amount of time, okay? It drifts off to the northwest and then builds north, and then does, at least at the tail end of things, some of the longer range spaghetti plots indicate that recurvature happening, although likely farther to the west, but still, nonetheless, recurving out to sea. But again, as I mentioned, with the influence of Humberto here to the northeast of where likely Imelda will set up shop, we're going to have some influence on the trajectory. They're going to orbit around each other, and that could kind of throw off exactly where the track goes. Let's look at the operational models, the comparison of the American, the GFS, and the European. GFS is going to be in yellow, European going to be in red. Let's jump out here. We'll go through tomorrow, we'll go through Friday, and then here we are Saturday. We've got the GFS that's starting to show some weak development at this point in time of Imelda, so it's going to take some time. European doesn't even show anything at this point yet. But both Humberto, right on, good agreement here, good signal for model agreement. That's what we'd like to see. That means the forecast on track at that point in time on September the 27th. Let's go out a little bit farther. GFS, and now the European joins in, showing development of Imelda, a little bit displaced in an exact location. Euro's a little farther to the west here, closer to the east coast of Florida, but both likely bringing impacts to the Bahamas. How strong, still too early to tell. Intensity, especially with the influence of another storm system, is a little bit harder to kind of pinpoint this far out. Humberto, here's Bermuda, just to the south and west of Bermuda here. Strong system likely at this point in time. We're already a hurricane, probably at that point a Category 2 hurricane if we're not overperforming at that point in time. Then we jump out a little bit farther, so we're starting to see these two storms influencing each other. You notice how close proximity they are? They're starting to influence their trajectory, and they're starting to pivot or orbit around a central point. Watch as we go out a little bit farther. We start to see this one get slingshot a little bit farther to the north and west, and Imelda being slingshot a little bit farther to the south and east. But nonetheless, I mean, this is a little confusing to look at, right? So we've got two separate storms here on the Euro, two separate storms, but in closer proximity on the GFS. Both showing a hurricane at this point, both systems showing hurricanes. And then we get out to the first of the month of October. GFS takes the storms out to sea. Both of them, not a big deal. Towards Bermuda likely, but mainland U.S. looks to steer clear at this point in time. Okay? So you look at this, you say, okay, they're all going out to sea. Keep a look on Imelda here. The Euro wants to do something a little bit sneaky. Slingshots or retrogrades this storm on this model run, starts to pivot it back to the west, closer to the U.S. East Coast. And if we were to take this out farther, this is out 10 days already, that's stretching it. But it does kind of bring it back towards the eastern seaboard. This is one model run. The GFS is not in agreement with it. But again, it is the Euro, so take that with what you will. We'll have to watch it very carefully. Steering mechanisms over here are going to get very tricky in the next couple of days. So this is a possibility, but it's certainly by no means set in stone. But we'll have to watch Imelda here. So the Fujiwara effect, we touched on that, and you saw the influence on the modeling there. Let's just talk about what that is, because it's not something that happens every single season. So this is when storms orbit around one another due to their proximity. They get so close to one another that they start to influence each other's intensity and trajectory. Now, sometimes, but not always, the stronger of the two will absorb the weaker one. And I know what you're thinking. Does that mean that it kind of just takes all the energy from the weaker one and becomes a superstorm? Not the case. It just completely destroys the other storm due to its wind shear being imparted on it, that it just absorbs whatever's left of the low pressure energy there. That's about it. Now, it doesn't happen all the time. Most occurrences, it just influences its track. It doesn't get close enough that it actually absorbs the other storm. Now, the last occurrence I could find where we did see, I believe it was Rina and Philippe. I think Rina was absorbed by Philippe in the Atlantic basin back in 2023. So it's been a few seasons, and it's quite a rarity. We've seen it, I think, a handful of times over the last couple of decades. So it doesn't happen always, but it does happen. And this may be one of those occurrences. All right, we got the updated CPC outlooks, Climate Prediction Center outlooks, long range on tropical development. So this takes us through the first full week of October. These are released on Tuesday. It shows maybe some low development out in the main development region, which by that point in time is unusual because we usually see the main development region start to shut down by late September or early October. This is indicating maybe something there. But certainly we go out another week, taking us through mid-October, and we're seeing nothing. No outlook for it, at least right now. There could certainly be something. Even the Caribbean looks dead at that point. Southwest Atlantic dead. These are the areas we turn to look for development in October. But you still have some little semblance here in the Western Caribbean, Southern Gulf. Low chances of development there. All right, out in the Eastern Pacific, we've got Narda, Cat 2 hurricane at the moment. It is nowhere near land, not expected to be anywhere near land. Moving off towards the west, weakening a bit, and then re-strengthening back to a Cat 2 before turning north and likely falling apart due to the cooler ocean temperatures in that part of the Eastern Pacific. All right, our scorecard is updated with the development of Humberto today. We're now up to 8. Eastern Pacific, though, at 14. We've had 2 hurricanes, 2 majors, and then 8 hurricanes, 3 majors out in the Eastern Pacific so far this season. All right, coming up after a quick break, the anniversary of Hurricane Helene's impacts are this week. We'll look back at that. And, of course, we've got brand new tropical trivia as well as the answer from last night's trivia question in just a little bit. We'll see you after a quick break. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. This week marks 1 year since Hurricane Helene formed as it moved across the Gulf of Mexico. It had rapidly intensified into a Cat 4, making landfall in the Big Bend region of Florida 2 days later. Helene went on to bring heavy rain and catastrophic flooding to several other states. Western North Carolina saw the worst of the damage. Tonight, one first responder is reflecting on the lessons learned from the storm.
For many, Hurricane Helene was in a league of its own.
It was worse than we anticipated, but we knew it was going to be bad.
Cove Creek Fire Chief Steve Marks says he saw the warning signs on the weather models and called his crew in early. Preparation, he says, was their first line of defense against the storm.
To make sure that we have the infrastructure and the equipment that we need.
He says preparedness also starts at home.
If our volunteers aren't prepared at home, they're not going to be able to respond. Or if they're here, they're not going to be comfortable about their loved ones being alone at home.
When the storm arrived, he watched Highway 321 vanish underwater.
Instead of seeing cars drive down the road, we saw debris. We saw outbuildings.
For days, the fire station was without power after it was hit by a landslide.
When the hill slid down, it took our propane tank with it, which disconnected the gas line to the generator, which caused the generator to stop. Boom, no electricity.
When the signal went dark, they figured out other ways to get power.
One of our fire trucks has got an onboard generator, so we were using it to recharge radios, to recharge the flashlights.
Firefighters manually pushed bay doors open, relied on maps and small rescue vehicles to navigate through the community.
That small little UTV got us into spaces that these big trucks would not go. And it carries some rescue equipment.
For days, the community was cut off.
The problem was for the next, say, 72 hours, if people needed help, they couldn't call. They had no cell service. And so we quickly moved into, let's evaluate where we think the greatest damage is, send our UTV, send our pickup truck out, and make sure these folks are okay.
The chief says the biggest lesson is simple. Be prepared and lean on each other.
Perhaps the greatest success story that came out of this was that community involvement, that in the face of this, tragedy, this huge crisis, neighbor helping neighbor.
Because when disasters strike, it's the community that keeps you going.
One Georgia resident is still trying to work through rebuilding her home that was severely damaged during Hurricane Helene. As of last month, when our sister station WMAZ checked in, their house was still not ready to move back in. Let's take a look.
Approaching the front of the yard, a tree fell there too.
Angel Johnson has been rebuilding her Sandersville home for more than a year. A severe storm in August of 2024 caused trees to fall on her home and her husband's shop.
I'm 34 and I never experienced anything like that before.
Then, Hurricane Helene came through a month later. More trees fell on the house, which caused water damage and mold. She hasn't been able to live there for more than a year.
So do you know when you'll be able to move back in?
No. They told us in May. May has passed. We're in August, so I'm not sure.
John Payne is an independent insurance agent with offices in Macon and Sandersville.
The phones were absolutely blowing up.
He says insurance companies did a good job taking care of people quickly. Almost all of his clients' claims are resolved, except for a few more complex cases. During recovery, the only complaints he heard were from people with less severe damage. They had to wait a little longer for an adjuster to come out than people with significant damage.
Some of those clients did have to wait a little longer than we would have liked.
Johnson says recovery at her home has taken so long because of the amount of damage, more than $300,000 worth. She had to get a new roof, rebuild porches, fix water damage, and replace her husband's shop.
They come in and they have plans to, well, this is done. Then they go back and they see, well, hey, we got to go back and do this.
Her homeowner's insurance rates haven't gone up yet, and she hopes they won't. Payne says rates constantly fluctuate as companies decide whether to take on more risk, but overall, Georgia rates are up statewide since 2020.
Between inflation and severe weather events that we've had since 2020, it's just kind of been a perfect storm.
Johnson may have to pay more for insurance, but her biggest concern?
Now that it's a year, and I'm thinking like, well, the longer days are behind us, but it's now like anxious, like ready to get home.
In Sandersville, Connor Hendricks, 13 WMAZ News.
All right, stick around. Tropical Trivia is up after a quick break. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. All right, yesterday's trivia question was, what was the intensity of the strongest hurricane in December? Yeah, outside of the season, but we can still get hurricanes. And it was a Category 1. That storm was Hurricane Alice back in 1954. It's interesting because it formed at the end of December. It's the only storm that spanned 2 calendar years back in 1954. Pretty cool, Hurricane Alice. All right, today's trivia question. What's the record for the most concurrent storms in the Atlantic? Is it 2, or is it 3, 4, 5, or 6, all at the same time? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on Hurricane Hub Live. A quick reminder, we are here 7 nights a week at 8 p.m. to bring you the latest on the tropics. We'll see you back here tomorrow.